On today's episode of Midnight Monster, we ask deep wood hikers and campers what is the strangest or scariest situation you've ever come across. If you have a story you would like to share about this situation, drop it down in the comment section below and let's go ahead and get started with story number 1. I distance hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early or staying out late to get as many miles in as possible. Sometimes walking into the pitch dark with low light headlamp gets spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under our canopy of the stars more nights than I can count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trails, riverbanks, lake shores, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because you must understand I've heard, seen, and smelt about all this region has to offer in the way of the wilderness. My scariest experience, though, happened at about 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light would be visible by the treetops for another 30 minutes. Another hour past that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between two steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and an old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack. I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 04:30 in springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing, dead quiet. Mid-step I froze. When our fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that instantly flashed in my mind was, as I stood there balancing myself in silence, was, if I hear that again, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to go back the way I came in a very fast manner. Why? Because the sound was not a bunch of branches breaking. It wasn't a deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get the fuck out. To describe as best as I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a small tree. More of a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head was that this sound was a crack and not a thud or a thump, and I've described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so loud. I had the sense it was about 50 yards directly in front of me and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn at a start up a ridge away from the creek. This meant that as soon as I got to the courage to move forward this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head is somewhere between meth fiend murderer and Bigfoot bludgeoner. Minutes pass, I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing, dead quiet. I've got about 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep up the 180-degree turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying to be quiet, taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten death. I've worked scenes where humans have expired in a past life as a firefighter. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made to the top of the ridge, I was huffing and puffing, and the first light was showing. I did not stop moving until full light was out and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in the woods. I've smelled it all. I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall and especially leafed out branches make a lot of noises on the way down. I've heard it many times. My roommate and I experienced a few creepy moments. We lived in the woods during quarantine, and we'd spend the days in the storm or shine drinking beers, picking up trash, swimming, and just goofing around. We also started doing something that sounds odd to say out loud, but at the time kept us sane. We'd get into the woods, strip off our socks and shoes, and hike in silence to this little lagoon we'd laid out. It was insanely meditative, and I loved just barefoot wandering. I felt so satisfied in this primal sort of way. Anyways, the more we roamed like that, the more in tune we got in the woods around us. Without the chatter between us and the careless stomping of booted feet, we'd become part of the woods in this weird way. It probably helped that I was stoned out of my mind half of the time. We'd surprise people pretty often without meaning to, passing within a couple of feet before they noticed us. It was like our gut started calling the shots. We could feel storms brewing. All the creatures seemed to stop minding us when we walked like that. So whenever the woods went silent, we knew something was coming. It was one of those days, with thick skies and kind of electric air. It'd been stormy for a few days and the woods were pretty empty. We'd only seen maybe 2 other souls all day. Darkness had started to creep in quicker than usual. We were headed out of the woods, barefoot, and knocking back of the dregs of some warm, shitty beer, chatting a bit about nothing I remember. We were coming up to this hill and all of a sudden, it was like I swallowed a snowball. I looked up at her and she was frozen mid-laugh. Something was wrong. The woods were off. We were surrounded by murky shadows and dead fucking silence. Heavy silence, and man, it was tense. Then we heard it. It was the metallic sort of sound and kind of change which we could not make out. Metal striking stone, over and over. A bit further down the trail, squarely in between us, the way out, we stood like statues tucked behind some trees just listening. A shovel. Someone digging. We crept closer and I remember how the sound made my palms itch. My friend's face was flushed rose red and I told myself I was being stupid. I had in my backpack a little spade we used to plant flowers and dig up rocks and such. Who was I to judge this person? But then again, that was just a little garden spade, and as we got closer it became clear that this person had a full-on shovel and was digging in the middle of the trail. I kept trying to explain it to myself. This person was just digging. Sure, it was dusk and all the light storm was hastening our way, but we all cope with quarantine differently, and sure, it's odd to carry a big shovel this deep into the woods, but maybe they're burying a beloved pet. And sure, it makes no sense that they'd bury their pet in the middle of a trail, but maybe they're digging a bike jump. And yeah, they don't have a bike, but on and on like that, my mind churning out reasons, and still the knots in my gut would not loosen. We were almost on him now. I think it was him, though they were wearing a hat, scarf, heavy clothes, all black, a bit odd for summer, but again, he might be in mourning for his sweet Fido, who loved that spot. In the middle of the narrow dirt trail, with every step my stomach hurt more. We were both shining in sweat. The sound of metal striking earth and stone seemed deafening. It's a primal sort of fear, isn't it? Rooted deep in our guts, completely deaf to every excuse I was handing it. We were just waltzing along 1 minute, cracking jokes, slugging beer, and suddenly, it was like every neuron was firing, every muscle tight enough to snap. My mind was racing and I was taking a stock of everything. 2 girls, barefoot in swimsuits and overalls, 2 empty beer cans. I had a bag of found trash and backpack of random shit. My friend was holding our bucket of rocks, though we'd pick skinny flat stones for skipping, not self-defense. I had a can of pepper spray buried somewhere in my bag, but, much to my mother's dismay I'd bet, could not easily access it. And that stupid fucking spade. It feels so insane looking back, but I've never been in a fight. I never raised my voice, and I spend most of my days talking to toddlers about emotional regulation. And yet, here I suddenly was tallying up what I had on hand that could be used as a weapon against a total stranger. But all those excuses I'd fashioned for him had fallen away, and only one thought stuck. Maybe this gut feeling is wrong. Maybe he's doing one of a million things. Maybe he'd feel awkward or embarrassed seeing us bolt away, but what if it's right? What if this cost is it's right? If we walk past and he swings his shovel, then what? What would the excuse cost us? Something shifted. I don't know what it was. I felt such a high voltage situation and a single spark in a gas-choked room. My friend went white and said the worst first words we'd exchanged the whole time. "Don't look at him. Run." We ran, crashed down into the woods off the trail closer to the water. We could jump in if he chased us. We sprinted, leaping over boulders, ducking under trees, thorns and stones, sticking into bare soles. I did not feel them, did not notice the blood on my feet till we broke out of the tree line. Later, we tried to piece it together and tried to understand what just happened. We were cucumber cool ordinarily and felt a sense of invincibility sneaking around the woods. It wasn't until we were safe home bandaning our feet that we figured it out. As far as we ever would, the spark had been silence. He had been shoveling, and safe at home, I admitted that I'd look back just to glance for a split second, and he had stopped shoveling and started walking towards us. This falls into the strangest category. Was solo pitching for a long weekend in the Pacific Northwest, and one day was in the rare part of the trail that's closer to civilization. So there was a higher chance of other hikers and campers being around. I saw one or two people, but was mostly from afar, and it was nightfall soon and getting cold. I was getting deeper into the woods, and I knew the odds of seeing someone else was unlikely. I was hiking around a small pond and was getting set up at a camp nearby when I heard some shuffling noises behind a small boulder or rock type thing. It was a repetitive noise and got louder and then quieter, but it never stopped. And basically, if you're a regular hiker, you know a noise that just does not belong in the woods when you hear it. I took out the 2 sharp knives that I carry when hiking and slowly walked around the boulder, honestly not knowing what I would see. What I did not expect and was very shocked to see was a very attractive couple in their 20s, having very aggressive but happy doggy style on a blanket. They were as shocked as I was to see one another, and they freaked out and yelled, as did I. And as they covered their bodies in their clothes in a panic, I awkwardly apologized, picked up all my gear, and just sort of jogged off into the woods, passing their tent they had pitched along the way, the same way I'd seen the dude, the tent he pitched in his nether regions. Also, in another part of the country, I thought I saw a bear once, and it turned out to be a giant pile of mud. I wonder if that couple's still together, and if I tell the story when they get drunk at parties like I do. I was hiking across Newfoundland following an old railway that was long ago disassembled and turned into a giant trail, sleeping wherever I found myself at night. One day I ran into a small cottage town, except everything was abandoned. Trailers falling apart, bus conversions burnt out, and small cabins all shuttered up. It was creepy but interesting at the same time. The sun was waning, so I decided to set up camp in a mostly empty lot that had an abandoned truck slowly falling into a ravine near it. Cooked up some food and crawled into my tent to take a nap. I wake up sometime in the night and hear footsteps outside my tent. At first, I think it was an animal, but the steps sounded like someone walking. A human. The steps get closer and go around my tent. I slowly and quietly pull out my knife. If he tries to get in, my plan is to stab him first and ask questions later. Anyone trying to get into my tent at night in the middle of nowhere is looking to do some kind of harm. My heart is racing at this point, but I try to just be calm and quiet. Luckily, the steps start moving away from the tent until I can't hear them anymore. I wait a bit to see if they'll come back, but I don't hear anything. I slowly get out of my tent. I don't see a thing. Without turning on my flashlight, I quickly take down everything and stuff it into my bag. After that, I just started walking down the trail to get the hell out of there. I walked until daytime, came across a road, and flagged down a truck. That guy was nice and drove me to town where I got a hotel. The creepy thing when I think about it was that whoever it was likely watched me walk into town from one of the abandoned structures. I'm guessing a squatter. I'd like to think he was just curious, but I'm glad I did not stay and wait to see if he'd come back. Walking a section of the Appalachian Trail with a couple buddies when we happened across a bundle of sticks. The sticks were made into a figure kinda similar to the ones from the Blair Witch Project. It was placed there by someone as it was dead center on the middle of the trail. Leaning against a rock, I thought it was cool, so I grabbed it and put it in my book bag. Anyways, we finished the hike and set for the night in our camping spot. We were all pretty wiped out from the long day, so after dinner, we retired to our respective tents and knocked out for the night. The next morning, I was the first one awake, so I got up to make the coffee. And what did I find? An identical bundle of sticks to the ones we found before, sitting atop the pile of charred wood from the previous night's fire. The first thing I did was check my book bag, and sure enough, the one I picked up was still there. Each of my friends swore they did not put it there, and I said the same. It was weird because we were all adamant about not putting it there, but I can never be sure one of them was not fucking with them or the other two of us. The thing that messes with me is the bundle I found in the morning was almost a replica of the one we found on the trail earlier. And I find it hard to believe one of the other guys could have made such a close replica without being able to model it after one in my book bag. And it's not like either one of us had placed the other one on the trail beforehand for us to stumble upon, as it was far out in the middle of nowhere. I want to believe one of them pulled a prank on the other two because the alternate scares the shit out of me. My partner and I were deep in the Mountain Adams Wilderness area in Washington State, United States, and there was no other campers around. We had spent the day fishing and exploring the creek around our camp. Around 2 a.m., he wakes me up and tells me to be quiet. Our little dog is quietly growling and looking in one direction. About 15 yards north of the tent, I can hear rustling and a woman's voice speaking quietly to herself. Could not discern any of the words, and there's no light, just the voice and the walking noise. It goes quiet and then picks back up on the other side of the tent, which is even deeper in the woods. Then it fades off into a dense forest. My partner grabbed his gun and was getting ready to confront them, but since it seemed to move on, nothing ever came of it. I cannot stress enough how deep these woods were. We were exploring the day before, and I had scratches from the twigs and branches. It was dense. The fact that there was someone alone wandering around talking to themselves in the middle of the night without a light or camp is freaky, and I still get chills whenever I think about it. The next morning we investigate and did not find any tracks, but there was a lit fire charred remains in the middle of a forest logging road about a mile up, and it was still kind of warm. I live near Lake on the Woods in northwestern Ontario. This one time, a friend and I were mountain biking on a hot August day when we ended up on a trail in the bush, where this old abandoned car graveyard was. Nothing too scary, it's pretty normal for people to scrap their cars in the bush around here, so we carry on. Buddy and I are excited to explore the area because there's a lot of interesting vehicles and parts to jump with. We ended up sticking around for about an hour or two until dusk. It was starting to set in, and we came across a 1950 Buick Roadmaster that looked like it got halfway through restoration. That's when we realized that something was sort of off about this place. There were no properties near this spot for miles, and it was very strange that someone would abandon such a beautiful car halfway through a repair. My alarm bells were ringing, but only a little, so we carried on. As we're pretty beat from all the riding we were doing that day, we decided to find a place to rest and walked a little more into the trail towards a small dirt pile. Then we immediately realized that something was wrong. The place was littered with animal bones from different animals. There were deers, skulls, rabbits, dogs, and what looked like feline bones. I'm starting to feel a little bit sick in my stomach, but my buddy seems unfazed by it. I can tell he's the braver of the two of us, or less intelligent at this point, because I keep telling him with increasing urgency that we need to get on our bikes and get the hell out of here. He tells me I should not worry and tries to rationalize it by saying it was some hunter illegally dumping. Despite the canine bones, he walked to the other side of the dirt pile, turned around ghost white, and said, "We need to get the fuck out of here now." I managed to peek around and caught a glimpse of what was on the other side. Holy fuck. Someone built a shrine here. At this point, I'm screaming inside of my head to leave. I scramble to grab my bike and book bag. As we're about to pedal off, we hear someone shout, "Hey!" right behind us, and it was thick. I never bolted so damn fast out of somewhere in my entire life. I tried to get a glimpse behind me, and there was an old man in a plaid shirt and blue jean overalls near the dirt pile with a shovel in his hand, shouting at us and gesturing us to come back. When we got close enough to the main road, we decided to take a break to catch our breath. My friend and I are soaked with sweat, chugging water, and completely unsure of what we just saw. We sat on the road for about 5 minutes, relieved that nothing came of it, and talked about what it might have been. My friend still trying to rationalize it. Suddenly, we hear a loud vroom. My heart skipped a beat, and he started the freaking car. We peeled it down the main road to his house in what felt like 2 minutes for what should have been a 10-minute ride. I could feel the lactic acid building up in my legs from pedaling so fiercely. Gears maxed out even going uphill. This was 12 years ago. To this day, I still don't know what was happening down that trail, but I'm glad I never stayed to find out. I was hiking a section of the northern part of Southern Oregon Trail. A few years back with my sister-in-law. It's a 72-mile trail broken into sections that can be easily hiked in a day. At the time, I lived about midway up the trail, fairly remote in a small community. It was mid-fall this one day when we set out. The trail was running alongside the south of the Umpqua River, and was pretty up and down in the beginning. We made it to a fairly flat section that was running just above the river. There was this beautiful view of the river through the trees, so we stopped to get some pictures and take a water break. I immediately felt uncomfortable, like someone was watching us. I slowly turned my head to look behind us and across the trail and up a very small incline through the trees. I could see a small meadow. Across the meadow, maybe 15 yards from us, was a tent, an old canvas-style tent. As I'm looking, I notice bones strung from the trees all around the meadows, like creepy death wind chimes. My stomach just clenched and dropped. I leaned in the sister-in-law and whispered, "Do not turn around and look behind us. Just continue walking up the trail and run when I tell you." We were close enough to the river that nobody was right next to us could have heard this. She did exactly as I told her to. Setting off at a brisk walk, we'd been before maybe 10 yards, and I could hear footsteps through the forest floor coming from behind and slightly above us. The part of the forest is very dense. There's a thick moss cover under the trees, so footsteps on it make very specific sounds. I leaned forward and told her to pick up her speed. She did. I did. And so did whoever was behind us. I leaned forward again and told her to run as fast as she could and do not stop until I told her to. For two middle-aged women, both slightly overweight, we ran like the damn wind. I just kept telling her, "Go, go, go." I could see ahead of us on the trail, and it made an incline and veered into the right along the river and around a cliff. I knew at that point that whoever it was going to have to come down onto the trail or stop. We kept running, and we probably ran at least a mile after that, even though we could no longer hear anyone behind or above us. That section of the trail was about 9 miles, and we're not halfway when this happened. We eventually slowed down, but just hurried as fast as we could the rest of the way. We had arranged for her younger brother, not my ex, to pick us up. We made it to the next trailhead fairly early, so we made our way to 138 and started walking east towards home, knowing he'd find us. He did, and was shocked at our story. We got home and immediately called our local sheriff, who lived just above us at the ranger station. He came to the house and heard our story. He explained it may be a day or two before they could get into the trail, as they had a missing hunter at the time they were searching for. So a few days go by and he shows up at our house to let me know that we were not crazy or imagining things. Someone did chase us. I asked what they found and who it was. He looked down at the ground and then looked up and said, "I'm not going to tell you what we found or who it was, because if I do, you will never hike anywhere again. What we found was not normal, and it would not happen up here again." He then instructed me to never ever hike unarmed again. I never found out what they found or who it was. I never hiked that section of the trail again, and it completely burnt last year. I also never hiked unarmed ever again. That was huge for me as I was not a gun person. I had many incidents living up there in the national forest with wild animals and other strange things, but never ever scared me as much as that day. Midnight Monster here. That was the Deep Wood Hikers and Campers' seriously strange, scary situations. I hope you enjoyed today's content. If you did, make sure you subscribe to the channel and press that like button. And always, leave your story in the comment section. I hope to see you in the next video. Have a wonderful night.